Perhaps you didn't know that at one time Wisconsin Rapids was the major trucking headquarters of the state of Wisconsin. And that's where our story begins. In the very earliest days of the trucking industry, E.F. Gilmaster and Son was the dominant trucking firm in this area. Tom Gilmaster, grandson of founder E.F. Gilmaster, joins us now in this March 2007 interview.
Today is Wednesday, March 14th, 2007. We're here with Tom Gilmaster, and we're going back in time to some of the early days of the trucking industry. So, good morning, Tom. Nice to see you. And
good morning.
And thank you for welcoming us into your home here.
Okay. Yeah.
And let's start at the very beginning with especially you, and then we'll be talking about your father and grandfather as well. But what is your date of birth and your place of birth?
Place of birth is here in Wisconsin Rapids, and it was October 6, 1930.
1930. So, hometown boy.
Yeah, I never moved out of the Wisconsin Rapids.
And your father, what was his name?
Arthur A. Gilmaster. Everybody knew him by Pink.
Pink?
Pink, yeah. Half the people, I think, didn't know his first name.
And getting back to the early days of the trucking company and the delivery service and taxi service, I believe it was your grandfather, E.F. Gilmaster?
Yeah.
What did the E.F. stand for?
Ernest Frederick Gilmaster.
Ernest Frederick
Gilmaster. Yeah.
And good German?
Yeah, he was German. He came from Germany.
And what was their first business that they were involved in?
They were involved in, they bought this Love House Tavern. I think it was Love House Motel, I think it was, or something. And they bought that. And then Green Bay and Western had passenger service. And then it was a breaking point between Green Bay and Winona, I think it was. And the railroad men used to stay here a lot, and then they stayed at the Love House. And, and that's how my grandpa got more or less started in the taxi cab business.
And then where would he shuttle some of the railroad men to and from?
Yeah, he would shuttle, and then he would pick up people at Milwaukee Road across the river on the west side in the Northwestern Depot, and he'd bring them back over to Love House or the Dixon Hotel, and meet, I think it was Witter, who was the other hotel.
From the from the taxi business, I understand they expanded some of their services as well.
Yeah, he, like I say, he distributed beer. He had a back of the Love House Tavern. He had a kind of a cooling house, and he stored beer in there, and then he distributed beer around town and Nekoosa. And then he kind of went into the trucking line. Nekoosa.
And that was by horse and wagon?
Horse and wagon, and my dad and my uncle, Dad's brother, would go with the horse and buggy, and they were too small they weren't big enough to unload barrels of beer. So they'd take the beer, a horse and buggy, and they'd drive it to Nekoosa. And then my grandpa used to catch the streetcar, and then he'd go to Nekoosa, and he'd unload the beer and pick up the empty kegs and that. And then my dad and uncle would drive the team of horses back, and my grandpa would catch the streetcar and come back. And I would say it was in the 20s when he started in on the dray line on that. And he started to work with the railroad companies. They had freight would come into the depots, the 3 depots, and then they would unload the boxcars. They had their own men, and they'd unload the boxcar, and then we'd go over there and pick up the freight and deliver it to various stores around Wisconsin Rapids area.
Well, it's a little before your time, but do you remember some of their early vehicles?
It was most of them was Model A's or Model T's, and they had no doors on them, just side curtains on them. And then later we started trucking for Preway, went out of town, Oshkosh and Beaver Dam, and Dad used to drive that quite a bit, and he said there was nothing but just side curtains because.
Now, during the 1920s and 1930s, it was pretty much run by your grandfather and your father and some other employees. How did they get along?
Oh, real good. They lived together. When my dad got married, he lived upstairs on the home on First Street, And then my mother, grandma and grandpa lived downstairs. And then my grandma said, well, why should they both cook meals? And why not come down and sit down at the table? And everybody sat at the same table and eat and that. So we were one big family. I can remember my grandpa used to do, he'd go every Saturday around noon, he'd go over to George Gibson's beer, I think he handled Pabst at that time. And they used to come in G bottles. There was 4 G bottles in a crate.
What exactly is a G bottle, Tom?
Well, they were, it was about a gallon of jugs, and 4 bottles would fit in there, and they had the handles, and you could pick up the crate. And
4-gallon bottles of beer.
Beer, yeah. And then he'd always go every Saturday around noon. He'd get it from George Gibson, and they'd take it out of the cooler, and that way it was cool. And
Nice and cool. And he would always say 1 bottle.
1 bottle for Sunday for when he went down to the lake.
Oh, that's great. As we start getting into the World War II years, I imagine they upgraded their fleet.
Yeah, they upgraded. We bought all new equipment in 1947 and 48. We bought all new Diamond T's.
Right after the war.
Yeah.
So were they working in the trucking industry during the war?
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
And what type of work were they doing during
Well,
the war years?
it was still delivering freight in town, and then we did work for. Well, at that time, I think it was called Prentice and Webers, and then they renamed it to Preway. And we were making detonators, and then they used to box them up, and we used to haul them to the railroad companies and load the cars and stuff like that.
So once again, it would be local hauling in the Wisconsin Rapids area, from a manufacturing plant like Preway to the depots.
To the depots
and then load them up and off they go.
Yeah.
And after the war years, I assume that's when you started seeing your fleet of trucks?
Yeah, we kind of upgraded our trucks then, and did a little more hauling for Preway, and then we had the railroad companies. We used to peddle their LCL freight and that, and we bought all Diamond T's we bought them from Andy Schill.
How many trucks did you have at one?
Well, we had 3 semis, and we had 4 straight trucks. Trailer, we had 2 closed trailers, and we had 1 flatbed trailer.
Okay. Improving your fleet, your Diamond T's, you were pretty proud of those Diamond
Oh
T's.
yeah, we were really proud of them and that. Yeah. And like I say, and Dad did all 90% of the maintenance on it.
Your father did?
Yeah.
So he was also the head mechanic?
Head mechanic, and he'd work on them in the evenings or on Sundays or Saturday afternoons. 1949 or 1950, then I went in partnership with my dad. And we were partnerships, and it was Gilmaster and Sons, and we dropped the EF, but we kept and Sons on it.
Oh, wonderful. So all of a sudden, you and your father are working side by side, and we're going into the 1950s. And your trucking fleet, I imagine, you saw some expansion during the 1950s as well?
Well, a little bit. We picked up all new equipment then, and like I say, and then everything was going real good and everything, and then as the times went on, the railroad companies quit LCL business.
LCL being?
Less than a carload.
Oh, okay.
And they quit it. We made stoves for Sears and Gamble's and that. They would make it during the summer. The line would run 3 shifts and that. And then they didn't have a big enough place to store everything, so we used to haul all their stoves to different places around town. Preway started doing more for Sears was strictly all carloads. And there wasn't that much LTL out of the Preway.
Less than a carload.
They put in their own porcelain plant, and that cut out our Milwaukee run and Beaver Dam run. And so, like I say, it was dwindling down little by little. And there's a little too much for one person and not enough really for 2.
Enough for 2.
And Dad said, well, I was wondering how long it was going to take you to realize that. So he was kind of glad, too, to get out of it.
Yeah, so the timing was right.
Yeah.
We can't thank you enough. We really appreciate you're helping us look back into the golden age of the trucking
Yeah.
industry. And you, your father, and your grandfather were there. So thank you very much for sharing that with us. And we wish you the very, very best.
Well, thank you very much, and I appreciate it. And
It was about 1925 when two local brothers, Louis and Quess Gross, no relation by the way, started their Gross Brothers Trucking Company that eventually expanded into the entire Midwest. Once again, Phil Brown as he interviews Bob Gross at his home in Brookfield, Wisconsin.
Wednesday, March 7th, 2007. We're here today to talk to Bob about his recollections of his life growing up in the Wisconsin Rapids area, and especially his life associated with Gross Common Carrier. Part of our interview today will start at the very beginning. So can you tell us where you were born and when you were born?
April 12th, 1926.
So
And
approximately 81 years old?
I'll be 81 next month.
81 next month. Excellent. And can you tell me a little bit about your father?
A very outgoing type person. And he was always happy, always smiles. A good family father, one of the kind that every kid in the neighborhood likes my dad. And almost everybody that worked for him liked him as well.
And that was Louis?
They called him Louis.
They called him Louis. Louis Gross.
Yes.
And then your uncle, can you tell us a little bit about your uncle?
Yes, he was not liked as well. He was more strict about everything. He would,
Said Quess?
that was Quess. Quess would fire some fellow one day and my dad would hire him back the same day. And he was, but he was a good office person, and that's primarily what he did. He took care of the books.
What were some of the early vehicles that were used for Gross Common Carrier?
Up until that time, they were both driving horses and I shouldn't say delivering from wagons. And they eventually bought a 1925 or 1926 old truck, and that began when my dad was driving that truck because Quess didn't think it was going to last. He didn't think those vehicles were going to stay. So my dad was getting home a little earlier from his work, being that he was driving the old Model T or Model A truck, and Quess was still out working with his horse. But eventually they had maybe 5 or 6 of those old trucks, and many of them were housed out there at the old barn at my Quess's. At that point in time, they were still doing local deliveries things between the various stores, and they would do it for different people. Johnson Hills, which was a department store, they did work there as well, and for other grocery stores around. And then later on, they went into the moving business, and they bought a big van, which front seat would seat 6 people, and it was made by the Badger Trailer Company. The body was built by the Badger Trailer Company in Milwaukee.
Was still in the 1920s, or are we working into the 1930s?
I would say we're well into the 30s.
Well into the 30s.
Yes. My dad had the personality to do all the sales work.
Okay.
And he did do that. He contacted the out-of-city customers, the meat packing companies. I remember making trips with him to St. Paul and sitting long hours in the stockyards where the smell was pretty bad. And Quess, of course, they stayed home and ran the operations when my dad was gone, and primarily he was, you might say, the office manager, so to speak. They sold the packers on an idea of a central distribution point, and they had 2 terminals that they were shipped into. They had a terminal in La Crosse, Wisconsin, a small operation there, but it was on a railroad siding, and some of the meatpacking companies would ship there. in their boxcars, and they would truck it from La Crosse to Wisconsin Rapids, where they would reassemble it again. And they eventually had about 6 or 7 meatpacking companies.
One of the things that intrigues me is when the Gross brothers purchased their first truck that I believe was used for the moving business. Can you tell us some of your early recollections of that first truck and some of your recollections of the moving van business back in the 1930s?
I don't remember a lot about them purchasing the trucks, I just remember them being looked pretty new to me because everything else was horse and buggies, and so we were to see a fleet of these half a dozen or so Model Ts with a little box on the back.
Now, when you would help people move, would you move them around the state, or would you go interstate, or what was your range?
Yes, they would. They didn't do long distance moving, like from Wisconsin to Kansas, for example. They did most of their moving work was within the state.
Like the moving van business kept the company busy during those other times.
That was a fill-in type, yes. And then they also began the freight business, got into the motor freight business between Fond du Lac and La Crosse. And that operated from Fond du Lac to Wisconsin Rapids and from Wisconsin Rapids to La Crosse, and serving the little communities in between. And and there was freight moving, actually. There was a big Ford distribution, a Ford tractor, Ford implement dealer in Fond du Lac, and we hauled a lot of farm parts all along that rural route. And that's what they went to next. And we were still doing the meat business, they were still doing the moving, but they started this little freight.
Early years, or early war years, late 30s, early 40s. Any recollections of the trucking business at that point?
It was gasoline and tires and oil were the most difficult things to obtain. And then, of course, many of the young employees were called into service. Mm-hmm. And that became a problem, that often they were short employees, and that's how some of us high school kids got jobs, because we were still in school.
After you left the Air Force, I assume your college years came up rather quickly?
They did. I went to the University of Wisconsin, Stevens, at Madison, and I was there for 1 semester, and there was just, the classes were so big. There were anywhere from 200 to 400 students in a class, in a lecture room, and I was not getting it at all. I was not doing well there. And so I left that Madison after the first semester and went to Stevens Point Teachers College, it was at that time. It's now University of Wisconsin, Stevens Point. And so I really did well there. And my old teachers were there, and my grades were good. And then came the time my dad asked, well, what did I want to do? So I'd like to be a veterinarian, because I'd been working for Doc Norton out there doing a variety of things for him, and I really liked that, working with animals. And so he kind of slunched down in his chair a little bit. The newspaper came up a little higher, and I knew that he didn't approve of that. So then I said, well, what would you like to have me do, Dad? And he said, well, I've been working all my life very hard. He said, you always hope that maybe your oldest son would like to get into the business with him. And I went back to school thinking about that. And about 6 weeks later, I just walked down to the school office and turned in all my books and things there. And I appeared the next afternoon at my dad's office. I walked in, and he was just like he was expecting me. He didn't ask why I wasn't in school. Mm-hmm. Or not a thing. He just pulled the drawer open, and out came a brochure on a traffic school in St. Paul. And he said, I think you ought to go here to start with. And it was all about rates and tariffs and learning that kind of thing. And So I did. I got on a train and went to St. Paul, and I was in that school for about a week. And all I need is the material. Where do we go next? He said, well, we need somebody to take care of a Fond du Lac office. He said, we don't have anybody there. We just have one man there, and he is out doing pickup and delivery work. And he said, we need somebody in there to control and take care and rate the freight bills and do things like that, answer the questions that the public have. So there I went, off to Fond du Lac.
And with you managing the Fond du Lac terminal at that time, you must have seen and witnessed the tremendous growth. Let's go through the 50s a little. Let's take a look at the growth spurt that the company went through at that time.
All right, the yellow truck line, which was a fairly large truck line operating out of Madison, Wisconsin, operated in Milwaukee and Fond du Lac, and they joined. We had terminal room in our terminal, so they joined us in Fond du Lac. And I got to know the yellow people quite well. And one day, their manager came in and he said, you wouldn't believe it, but we're being sold. It's up for sale. So I thought right away we should look into that. So I called my dad right away and I told him about this. I said the owners were selling yellow and maybe we could use that because we had a terminal in Fond du Lac already and yellow had good business there. And I said we could get into Milwaukee and Madison and tie that into our operation. So my dad called the people and was able to make the purchase. And that was the big expansion for us. We also did a big interline work with Olson Transportation at Green Bay, which Central Wisconsin eventually purchased. But we were doing a big business with them as well. And we were very busy in Fond du Lac and those particular years, and business was good. But another expansion that we had during that same time was the SOO Line Railroad. They were doing a big business with the SOO Line in the local area of Wisconsin Rapids, and Stevens Point was a big hub for the SOO Line Railroad. And they asked us to get involved in their interterminal, they called it. And so trains wouldn't have to stop at every little town along the way. They'd instituted a truck service, and Gross became that truck service for the SOO Line Railroad. And that operated through all of the, you might say, from the Stevens Point to Neenah Menasha to Black River Falls north.
How large did the company become?
I would say in number of terminals we had was really, the largest we had was Sheboygan, Fond du Lac, Wisconsin Rapids, and La Crosse. Years later, a terminal was built at Wisconsin Dells, which they eventually outgrew, and we rebuilt a new one in Baraboo. But those were the four large terminals at the time. Then Milwaukee became a part of it as well, and Milwaukee moved 4 times from one facility to another, renting each one, until they eventually built their last terminal, which was in West Allis.
During that growth period of the 1950s for Gross Common Carrier, I believe the labor unions started coming into play about that time. Can you tell us a little bit about your early involvement with the labor unions and the Teamsters?
They would get those people to not load or unload our trucks or receive any of we brought products in, they wouldn't take them. And so unless you're a union, and union was union. It didn't matter what number local it was, or whether it was a Teamsters, or whether it was a machinist, or what it was. One union supported the other. But eventually, we couldn't go anywhere. We couldn't do anything unless we had a union man doing it. We had to get into the unions in most part. And Art Clark, when my father died in 1955, he was in the Wisconsin Motor Carrier Advisory Labor Council. And he took me under his wing, and he and Art and my father were very close friends, and so he kind of took me into the Labor Advisory Council and taught me the things that I should know. It got to the point where I would attend some of the negotiations with Jimmy Hoffa as a group. I might have been like one of 15 that would go there and negotiate the contract for Wisconsin.
You on a first name basis with Mr. Hoffa?
No, not at all. No,
No.
not at all. He was, what he said was, he didn't have to put it in writing. What he said was done. And he was that kind of a fellow, and we as employers respected him for that. There was no, have a deal here, go home, go back to your office, and tomorrow you don't have a deal. What he said was put in cement, you know, a fighter for the Teamsters, but he's one you could trust. As, at least he didn't have to worry about things not being as discussed when you got home.
Well,
Milwaukee was getting to be a large size operation, and my uncle, I had an uncle that was here at the time, that is John. My dad's brother, younger brother, was at the Milwaukee terminal, and he was beginning to have a health problem, and so they asked me to go to Milwaukee and work there. I came to Milwaukee to replace John, and it's difficult to stay up with our growth in Milwaukee. We had moved 4 times till finally we built our own terminal in West Allis. We had rapid growth in Milwaukee. We actually outgrew the terminal in West Allis until at the point when deregulation came in. And then we found it starting to get smaller. The business started to fall off, and it went to the non-union competition.
how large did gross get to be before deregulation started bringing things down?
Well, in the early part of deregulation, we even had growth. We expanded in areas that we did not have authority in the upper part of Michigan, the UP as it's called. We began an operation up there because of another truck line that couldn't meet the competition, folded there, and we took over their primary terminal, and that was Claremont Transportation. And there were several others like that along the road. We started operations in Iowa and Chicago, and we'd already started to St. Paul, Minneapolis, St. Paul. So we were operating in about 7 states at that time. So our expansion was still growing even under deregulation. We had a good tight-knit organization, and they were growing, but it didn't. When we got along about 1985, the competition began to come to life. Well, we had reached a maximum point. We were somewhere in the about 26 million a year, and we had in excess of 400 trailers, and approximately 250 plus motor vehicles, tractors and trucks. In 1976, I recall when I became president, our office primary tool we had was the National Cash Register machine, which was used for payroll only. That was the only thing in the whole office that had been automated. And so we decided to get the company moving in the direction of computers. Then my brother-in-law, Don Soy, who had been with IBM, joined our company, and he brought with him a vast amount of knowledge, the latest of IBM in equipment that we had. In fact, with the equipment that we had Don had advised us to only lease it, because he said it's such big changes coming up, and you want to be able to go with the change. And so about the time that Don came in, he brought with him the new equipment that replaced the others, and we really developed a superior computer system for for the trucking industry. One of them in particular was for the maintenance of equipment. We had several truck lines that came in to look at our maintenance, our computer program, and we had thought at one time of putting it on the market to sell. Don came right into our Wisconsin Rapids office because he had the knowledge of, my brother died, and he had been our sales manager, and Don took over in the sales area, and brought into the new development of the computer equipment and systems and applied it to the various departments.
Well, Bob, it certainly has been a wonderful life, and we certainly appreciate your time today to tell us about the early days of the trucking industry in the central Wisconsin area and how the growth spurts that Gross Common Carrier has gone through over the years. Thank you for sharing that with us today.
Well, thank you and Paul for even inquiring, including me on your survey of the transportation in Wisconsin Rapids.
Well, thank you.
The year was 1929, and even with the Great Depression bearing down, two more brothers ventured into the trucking business. Arthur and Harold Clark had little to lose in this venture, and with a meager investment, their trucking business mushroomed beyond their wildest dreams. It was the birth of CW Transport.
Here today talking with Ken Clark on the history of the CW Transport Company. Hi Ken, how are you today?
Fine, thank you.
Oh, that's great. Good to see you. And we may as well start at the very beginning. When were you born and where?
I was born on February 1st, 1914, in Milledore, Wisconsin, Wood County.
And your father's name?
William J. Clark.
And I understand he was a mechanic.
He owned a garage and a mechanic.
With your father being a mechanic, you must have worked side by side with your father to learn the trade?
He learned me the trade, he learned me the business and the whole thing, yeah.
You are related to Art and Harold Clark?
We're cousins. Their dad and my dad were brothers.
We're brothers. And do you remember some of the first trucks that Art and Harold were involved with?
I started out driving truck with them in 1933, after I graduated out of high school. And they had two trucks, each one had a truck and a trailer. And then later on, before I left, they bought another one.
And what were they involved with at the beginning? What type of trucking were they involved in?
When Art was young, got out of school, he bought a used dump truck, and he done the work for the farmers around there, hauling gravel and sand, and he was hauling sludge from the Nekoosa Edwards Paper Company to the farmers. They used it to put on the ground for the crops, and then eventually he sold that truck. And he bought a used truck and a trailer, and then Harold got a truck and a trailer. That's when they started out together. Each one owned their own truck. And they lived in Rapids by that time. They moved to Rapids. And that's when I started to work in 1933.
Now in 1933, the Great Depression was going on at the time.
Yes, it was, still was there.
And they were able to find enough business in the local trucking industry. What were they doing?
Well, we made it, but it's pretty tough. Many times I couldn't cash my checks because they didn't have no money in the bank.
What type of things were you hauling back in those days?
Well, in NEPCO and Consolidated were hauling paper.
Hauling paper products for Nekoosa Edwards Paper Company and Consolidated Papers?
Consolidated had R.W. Donnelly, a big paper company in Chicago, and they shipped a lot of paper. And so we got a lot of work with them. And of course, NEPCO, and we hauled out of the beer mill. And we hauled for Frank Gill Paint Company. Frank Gill would get big 55 gallons of stuff to make his paint, mix his paint. And Preway, we hauled stuff for Preway, in and out. Okay. Eventually we picked up business.
And once World War II came on the scene, I understand you boys were awfully busy with the trucking
Yeah, then
products for World War II.
I pin out of work night and day.
How large was the fleet of trucks during that time?
Oh, I suppose that we had about, I'd say maybe about 40.
So that was tremendous growth from
It was.
1 or 2 trucks in
Yeah.
1933 all the way up to 30 or 40 trucks by World War II?
Yeah, trucks and trailers, yeah, half and
Trucks-
half.
Trucks and
Half and
trailers.
half, so it.
So during the war years, what were you hauling?
Our biggest hauling, one time they come up and checked me out, and we were doing 98% of our hauling was for the war effort. So it helped me when I wanted to buy parts. I had a number that he gave me, and I could use that number on my order, and it would help me get parts. And then we hauled an awful lot of shells that's made in Chicago, 30 caliber shells made out of brass. And they come in a great big wooden crate with 3/4 inch lumber, fresh sawed lumber crates. We haul them big boxes, trailer load after trailer, way overweight, because there's no weight. And we haul them to the St. Paul, the ordnance plant in St. Paul, and they loaded them there with powder and shot and stuff. Then we could haul them back to Chicago or around wherever they wanted them, see. That was the biggest hauler, but we hauled everything.
Art and Harold built up their fleet of trucks. Was there a particular brand that
Internationals.
they liked? Internationals?
Yeah, we always did, yeah.
So you became quite an expert at repairing and maintaining those international trucks?
Yes, sure. Any truck, yeah.
What was Art's primary responsibility with CW Transport? Harold?
He was president of the company.
Okay, Art was president,
Yeah.
and then
Harold was secretary, and he moved to Chicago and opened an office in Chicago that stayed there.
okay, so Harold ran the Chicago terminal.
Right, yeah.
Who owned? If Art owned 51% of the company, who owned the other 49%?
Harold,
Okay, so the two boys,
yeah.
the two
started-
brothers,
Yeah, they started out, yeah.
owned it.
Chicago became a big shipping hub, you know. And our terminals increased. We bigger. Eventually, we built a great big terminal there in Chicago that on 55th. And first, we built a terminal on 55th Street by the old airport, Chicago. Then we bought out Olson Transportation Company out of Green Bay. Overnight, my job was double. I had twice as many tractors, trailers, people working. And we ended up with 2 garages in Chicago. So we sold one and we built a great big terminal on 71st and Harlem Avenue in a small town of Bridgeview. We had the longest, the largest terminal in the world for a while until somebody in Texas beat us out. I don't remember, we had 100 and some doors of freight.
100 and some doors. That must have been huge.
It was larger than a football field.
Now, once the terminal was located in the Chicago area, did the name of the company remain?
No, we changed it, we shortened it up. We bought out a lot of companies. We bought an awful lot of small companies.
Following World War II, CW Transport really saw quite an expansion of their operation.
Yeah.
Can you tell us a little bit about the size of the company as it grew during the 1950s and 1960s?
Well, I was telling you that that we bought out a lot of small companies, so we got a lot of equipment that brought us back. That brought us up fast, bigger, more business, more terminals, more states to run in.
Do you remember when you had to go out and purchase trucks? How many trucks would you purchase at a time?
My biggest purchase on trucks was 50 for the bulk division in Chicago.
During that period of time, with all those trucks, how did you supply all the tires and all the other maintenance items on these trucks?
Well, I bought my tires by a carload lots, so I could get them cheaper. Eventually, I bought all the parts. bought all the trucks, bought all the, my biggest order on the trailers, one day I ordered 325 trailers. Aluminum trailers, lighter, wider, higher, longer, haul more freight with less help, with less drivers. The biggest cost we had was the drivers. Union made us pay them pretty good money.
Mm-hmm.
When they're driving, they're paying by the mile, and when they're broke down, they're getting paid by the hour. They like to sit in their trucks until I get them moving.
Now, with all those drivers and with the company expanding, were there some incidences where did you have many accidents, or were there fires, or what happened to some of the traumatic?
Well, we had them all.
You've had accidents, fire.
We had accidents. We had trailers catch fire because we had the tube-type tires, and when it went flat, they'd run so hot they'd catch fire. And a lot of times they'd burn the trailer down. Everything's gone. You have to pay for everything.
Now, as we started getting larger and larger through the 1950s and 1960s, about how many units did, like at the peak of CW Transport's history, how many trucks, how many terminals?
When I retired, we had 3,000 units on the road every day. Mm-hmm. We run in 11 states. I had 19 shops in 11 states.
And they were all under your
I took care of every damn one of them. Yeah. They had I'd get calls, they got a problem, I'd straighten it out.
You were director of maintenance
I was.
for all of those?
Everything, every truck, every mechanical part was in my jurisdiction. Done a lot of traveling. I'd fly out in the morning, Monday morning, and be gone all week, come home Saturday night.
Now, here in Wisconsin Rapids, you had a number of different facilities that you operated it out of. Can you tell us about some of those?
We had two places, yeah. We bought a building that American Carbonic had. They went out of business. And we bought it in 1938 or late 38 or early 39. We bought the building for $10,000. Nobody else wanted it there. It was on McKinney, so we remodeled it. I had a big shop there. My shop was 25 feet long and 50 feet wide. And my office was in there, and we had a dock, and we had the main office. And they had 3 floors, so we used one floor for the general office, the main office that really grew. All the equipment up there and all that. Then I built the school on 4th Avenue. He bought the school and wrecked it.
So Ken, CW bought the old Emerson School property in the 300 block of 4th Avenue North?
Yes. Yeah.
Demolished the building and built their new office and shop on the site?
Yes. And that's where I ended up with my office over there, and I moved the maintenance over there. But in the big main shop, I built a big rebuilding shop.
Towards the end of your career, retiring in 1978, you started seeing the change in the trucking industry. I believe it had something to do with deregulation in the 70s.
Yeah.
And can you give us a little insight on what it was like?
We could build a terminal or rent a terminal and start operating out of that for that territory. So we had some good territory in Ohio and Indiana, Louisville, Kentucky, North Carolina. I had a shop way down North Carolina, Charlotte, North Carolina. And so we could expand a lot any way we wanted to because we had no regulations. That's where we really grew the fastest, of course.
So deregulation really helped you expand.
Oh, sure.
Now, looking at the local trucking companies, how would you compare yourself to Gross Common Carrier, for instance?
Well, we were a lot larger. We covered a lot more territory. But we worked with them. I mean, we had no problem with them. I knew all the two Gross brothers, and there's no rivalry that I know of. They had their way going. I knew the maintenance guy there all his life.
You were good friends with the other maintenance man at Gross?
Yes.
I imagine you had to borrow parts back and forth sometimes?
Yeah,
or
we could.
What brought the end to CW Transport eventually?
Well, so things went along good until Art had a massive heart attack, and so he died, and then things started to go to hell. Because Art was the guy that kept it going.
Art kept it
He
going.
came back and he catch these people making foolish decisions, and he'd stop them. See, we made money. We made a profit every year until about the time I retired. Gerber bought it. Then they started to go downhill.
I see.
One day Gerber called them up. They closed them down because they owed the union people in Cleveland, Ohio. They owned the money. They owed money to the truck drivers and stuff. So they started a class action suit against Gerber. And that was the end of it. Friday morning, Monday morning, Harold Jr. got a call that he had to have everything delivered, and everybody fired, laid off by 5 o'clock Friday of that week. Friday, they laid off 1,400 people.
Approximately what year was that when the company finally shut down?
That was 1988.
1988. Once again, with Art Clark Sr. involved in the company, how did his son, Art Jr., get involved in CW Transport?
His son came in and helped him when he was younger, so I put him to work bought a garage. He bought the old garage, the Chevrolet garage, and he put him to business for himself.
So Art Clark Jr. never really was involved in CW
Not too much,
Transport.
no.
Not too much. Now, how about Harold Clark Sr. and then Harold Clark Jr., his son? Well, Harold Clark Jr. eventually became president of CW Transport, I believe.
Yeah, Harold Jr.
Harold Jr. became president.
Yeah.
And so it was actually Harold Clark Jr. that received the call that fateful day
Yes,
that eventually laid off 1,400 employees.
that's right.
Okay.
He was president at that time.
Which was the company when you retired, Ken?
When I retired, he had 3,000 units, and I had a maintenance work in 19 in the company. We served 11 state area, and I had 19 shops.
And 3,000?
Yeah, 3,000 units.
And we certainly have enjoyed revisiting the past 93 years with you.
Got it.
And we certainly appreciate your time today. So thank you very much for sharing your life with us. And we wish you many more happy birthdays.
Thank you.
So thank you, Ken.
Thanks again, Phil, for a great job. You certainly asked all of the right questions.
Well, Paul, aside from cranberries, you know this is what I like to do best. And I look forward to doing more of the same.
Well, Phil, that won't be long in coming. There's a lot more local history waiting in the wings. So for now, I'm Paul Gross.
And I'm Phil Brown.
Thanks.
Thanks for listening.